Hey everybody, today is Monday, December 12th, 2022. Coming up on the show today, from the Apple TV Plus movie Spirited, editor Brad Wilhite.
It was kind of like being next to a football training camp because they were just so intense and brought a really cool energy to the set that I'd never seen before. He was like, you got to do 5.1 because it'll make our temp mixes go that much faster. And I was like, okay. So, you call the post soup and you're like, I need 5.1 on the cutting room. He's like, we had lights in the shot. Like nobody cared because it had this Broadway feel to it. Then you send it to sound. And the first thing the sound guy is like, hey, what's with the lights in the shot?
Yes, all that and more on this edition of The Rough Cut. Well, season's greetings, my friends, and a happy holiday season to you all. You know there was no way I was going to let this season of giving pass us by without giving you an episode on editing a holiday movie. And I didn't. Here it is. My gift to you. It's the movie Spirited, starring Will Ferrell and Ryan Reynolds. A delightful comedic twist on the Charles Dickens classic A Christmas Carol. This time with Will Ferrell as the ghost of Christmas Present and Ryan Reynolds in the unredeemable Scrooge role. Yes, that's unredeemable, not irredeemable. You'll see. Like I said, there's a twist. A few, actually. And it's fun. You should watch it. Especially if you like musicals, because it's a musical. With all the big, splashy, funny song and dance moments you'd expect. And whom do we have to thank for editing together all those moments into a fun movie? None other than today's guest, editor Brad Wilhite. This is Brad's first time on the podcast and his first time cutting a musical. No, there is no connection between those two things, other than it gives us more to talk about on the podcast. As in, what's it like for an experienced editor to suddenly be working on a new kind of movie? One that might test their skills in ways that have never been tested before. See? Lots for us to talk about. Spirited teams Brad up once again with frequent collaborators Sean Anders and John Morris. John Morris is co-writer, and Sean Anders, well, he's the other co-writer, and he also directs the film. Brad was a lot of fun to talk to, and I can't imagine not enjoying being a collaborator with him. And you can tell in this interview that he has not lost the spirit of joy when it comes to editing. So I hope you not only learn a thing or two from the podcast, but that it also puts a smile on your face as well. You know what puts a smile on my face? That's right, sponsorship dollars. So please give a listen while I pen a little holiday greeting to our friends and Rough Cut sponsor, Extreme Music. Now suppose you'd like to make a little insert your non-secular holiday here musical of your own. You'd want it to have that magical sound that evokes thoughts of the season of giving. Lots of bells, probably. And maybe a trumpet and a snare drum. And why don't you throw in a choir while you're at it? Well, you can get all those things and then some when you reach out to Extreme Music for their help in giving your next film or TV show the very best in production audio. They have a seemingly endless supply of great music from amazing composers and producers, all wrapped up in one super easy-to-use website. You just tell them what you want, and they'll give you back tracks that are customized in both length and instrumentation to suit your story best. You can even give them a reference track, and then they can re-gift you ones just like it. And it's all free to try out. So maybe you need a little music for your next holiday party. Put someone in charge of DJing the tunes right off the Extreme Music website. And when you're ready to license those tracks, you can also do that right there on their website, or one of the Extreme Music elves at an office near you can lend a hand if you need that personal touch. And honestly, who doesn't? So the next time you have a little holiday tale to tell it with great music from those audio angels at Extreme Music. All right, time for us to be visited by the ghost of post-production present. He will come in the form of editor Brad Wilhite. There's a lot of self-loathing that goes on here, it's part of our charm.
Yeah.
You feeling comfortable, Brad?
No.
Strap yourself in because it's going to get worse. I have to say, and I don't know how I missed this, but I admit I didn't get the memo that this was a musical before I watched it. I mean, I knew there was some songs in it, but boy, is it a musical. There's a lot of big numbers in this film. And the director of this particular musical is Sean Anders, whom you've worked with on a bunch of films.
Yeah. Anders and Morris.
I think it's safe to presume that he was the one that brought this project to you. Maybe not. We'll see. But let's get the ball rolling in regards to Spirited by talking about how you became attached to the project and how it was pitched to you by Sean or whomever pitched it.
Well, yeah, it was a slippery slope in the beginning because Anders, I'd cut all his movies. Well, not all of them, but most of his movies. I've been working with him and John for quite a while. And, he got this big, giant musical to do now, this Apple musical. And everybody was like, Wilhite, who's this guy? So there was a bit of a back and forth in the beginning to get me on the project. But eventually enough people said yes. And Anders, was like, he's my editor. He's cut all the stuff. I want him on the film, and everybody signed off from all camps, and I was in, and I couldn't, it was really a nail biting experience in the beginning because I don't have any musical credits. I can barely spell musical.
I got to say, the next question I was going to ask was, have you ever done a musical before, and how much of an adjustment was it for you as an editor?
I didn't like musicals.
I hope you do now.
Oh my gosh. Doing the research of the movie, I was like, why did I have such an aversion to musicals? Because I was watching Chicago and Fiddler on the Roof and all these other ones. And I was just loving every one I watched. And I was really enjoying watching these musicals. And I was like, oh man, these are the best.
Well, okay, so musicals weren't in your wheelhouse going into this.
Right.
As a fan, so to speak. But from a practical standpoint, did you have to change your process in any appreciable ways? Were there things about the job that were just different for you?
Yeah, from day one. I was calling Tom Cross. I called him, and I'm sorry, the editor's name eludes me now, the guy who cut Chicago. I was emailing with him. He's London-based, I believe. And just sending them questions and like, what do you guys do? What's your workflow like? And they were giving me tips and kindly taking all my goofy questions and really kind of gave me some guidance on how to set up the Avid project and some tips and things to do. So that helped. And then once you get there, some of those still hold true and can work. And while others, like our process was so different and some things just didn't work then with the way we were shooting the film. So it was a bit of learn as you go.
I don't mean to put you on the spot, but that is kind of why we're here.
Yeah.
Do you remember anything that Tom Cross, Mr. La La Land, Mr. Whiplash, what did he say to you about, well, Brad, you got to make sure you do this?
Well, the one thing he did is like set up your bins in like little sequences. Like, if you have this musical number and it's 6 minutes long, you're going to have millions of footage, right? And he was like, set them up in little wins. So like, you cut this first, and the musicals are they have little basic structures that you can set up is like sub scenes kind of, and you can edit those and keep the bins relatively manageable. And I did that and enjoyed that because you could cut a bit of the musical number and still feel like you've accomplished something for the day, even though you had the rest of the scene to cut. I thought that was a really helpful thing. He was also a big fan of supergroups. But the assistants were always being challenged because we were editing the song on the set a lot. So it would get really tricky and almost mind-numbingly hard to do supergroups to where you didn't have big chunks of black in them. And I was finding those were a bit overwhelming and kind of a waste of my time to watch.
They talk about VFX projects being really challenging, and they are. It's the musicals that really I find overwhelming to wrap my head around, just getting all those little pieces. So I assure you we're going to be talking a lot about that and digging in more into the sage advice of Tom Cross and how you interpreted things like that. Before we get too far away from talking about Sean, I think you've done about 8 different projects with him, whether he was producer or director, something like in that neighborhood. How has your process with him evolved over the years in terms of the way you collaborate? And was there anything about the musical component that forced a change on how you two collaborate?
Yeah, Anders is like working with your best friend for the most part. We have a very safe cutting room where we don't even shame if you fart in the cutting room. Like that's one of our things. We just, you're allowed to do it. Nobody's going to make fun of you, and it's okay.
Must be hard for you to find an assistant.
And you have 2 couches. It's really easy. Put one on the left, one on the right. Anders, it's the left one. Morris on the right, and they never switch, and if they do, something's wrong. And it's just very casual and very open and free and fun and never, there's of course arguments, but it's always with a sense of fun, and nobody's ever right. It's only until you put it in front of the audience do we find out who was right and who was wrong. And we've all been right and we've all been wrong, probably more times wrong than right.
Well, that's what making a movie is all about. Being wrong and being right, and then being wrong again, and then hopefully ending up being right.
Yeah.
Going back to the musical part of it and the way you do collaborate, did that challenge any of the traditional processes that you two had together?
Yeah, I think in the beginning, just shooting some previs, like video footage of the dancers and kind of getting like a blueprint of what we would do later, I think was a lot of fun and a good way to kind of everybody to cut their teeth without the weight of the production on your shoulder. And even for the dancers and for the actors, a lot of the times the dancers just filled in for the actors because they weren't there yet. But it was fun to work out the kinks with Anders at that point with the video footage and the previs, I guess, for the lack of a better term, of these dance numbers.
You've already sort of tipped your hand that you worked on location. Tell me a little bit more about getting settled in and, the process for working on location, because it's not like, oh, I live in LA and I'm going to be working out of this post house down the street. You're being away from home and it's a big thing. So tell me about the things that you have to put in place, the calls that you have to make.
Well, you got to start hunting your crew. And it was during COVID, still was going on pretty hard at that time. So it was really hard. I was like, this is going to be a slam dunk to find a crew to go do this Apple musical in Boston, location gig. Like I can remember as an assistant, I would have jumped at this chance, but I was like struggling to find a crew, but eventually found one, got out to Boston and just started working in the production office, meeting everybody, and they would all come by and we'd start to put these videos together of the dancers, and meeting all the dancers was a real fun thing to do. There was like 30 dancers. It was like, it was kind of like being next to a football training camp because they were just so intense and just, it was a lot of fun. It brought a really cool energy to the set that I'd never seen before. It was always quiet on the set. Things were buttoned up. People were supposed to be like, and these kids were like, come on, let's go. They were really bringing energy, and it was just infectious to everybody. During pre-production, and it just carried through into production as well. But yeah, it was fun, the pre-production of it all. I'd never been on a movie so early on. So I was like, wow, this is going to be great. I got all this time. We can figure out the workflow and cut these musical numbers on video. So I feel better. Anders feels better. Dancers, choreographer, DP, camera, everybody feels good about being able to be given this chance to really like shoot these numbers all the way through. And it wasn't, like I said, didn't have the weight of the production on your back. So you're able to make these mistakes because you're learning the choreography and the camera moves that you're going to do and what you like and what you didn't like. It was really cool.
Did you meet the dancers just as a matter of course, like we were all there together, or was there a specific reason why, Brad, the editor, we need you to communicate with the dancers?
Yeah, no, it was just like I worked in the same building and they couldn't keep me away. Like I went to the props department. I was like walking the aisles. And it was like a Target. It was like you were just walking through aisles and aisles. It was like a Target at Christmas, right? It was just mind-blowing, the amount of items they had. And then you go to the construction department, the mill, and the guys are building and sawing and hammering and doing all these things. And then you have the dancers, and there's just such a cool vibe with everybody. And it was, you want to get to know everybody. And you see like the art department has all these surreal pictures up on the board, and the drafting, guys are drafting, and you're like, this is, we're literally making a city here. It felt like, it was really cool.
So was that coolness largely a factor of just the spectacle of Spirited itself? I mean, this big Christmas movie, big production, all kinds of, the big dance numbers, or as an editor, let's say you're cutting Hot Tub Time Machine. Is it just as important for you to be on location, or is it really, this is a different animal?
It was a different animal, but it was cool to be on location because, I was cutting video tap footage as they shot. So Cobbsy, the video assist guy who plays the cabbie who gets pulled out of the cab. Yeah. He also has other parts in Anders' movie, and he's just the funniest guy on set. But I was working with him and they would shoot, And, I'd be like, Cobbsy, did it upload yet? Trying my best Boston accent. And
That's pretty good.
Yeah. And then it would come to me and I would download it and I'd cut it in and we'd be doing that throughout the day, and occasionally wherever the director goes, it's always so funny. Wherever the director goes, there's like 5 guys on a walkie, like Sean's coming to Crafty, so the chef can get ready or Sean's walking to props. So the props guy, whenever he shows up to me, he's like, over my shoulder. He's like, hey, you got that scene cut? I'm like, oh my God. So I would, have to back out of something I was doing, and then the system would crash.
Hey, wait a minute.
But
I'm going to edit that part out.
But it was great because he could just come right over to me and see where he was at in the process. And it wasn't like he was doing it all the time because, he had so many things to deal with. But sometimes he'd want an answer to a question or come see. Or sometimes I'd go get him. I'd be like, dude, you got to come check this out. This is crazy.
Well, it does sound like a very vibrant communal atmosphere. And I'm definitely getting ahead of myself because this is a question I typically save to the end. But since you brought up Cobbsy being the cab driver, do you show up anywhere? Are you in the background? Are you a voice? Any kind of fun tidbits?
Yeah. I'm a story cashier where the kid goes in to buy the flip-flops. Because we watched the movie and I was like, the girl breaking out the flip-flops, there's a cute shot where flip-flops, her toes are on the end of the bed and she's like admiring her new flip-flops. And I'm like, we never saw him buy them. I just miss a little of that. He's like, okay, we're going to reshoot that and you're going to be the store cashier. And I was like, awesome.
See, this is why people really want to be an editor. It's to be an extra, not for the actual craft itself.
I try not to push for things like that. I'll try and put my voice in from time to time, and editors will be like, what is that? Take that out.
Well, let's just for fun, and I'm going to assume it was the musical numbers or a musical number, but I'm curious, what was the first thing that Anders shot and that you were working on?
I think it was Bringing Back Christmas. The first production piece or the first previs piece?
Well, yeah, that's a good point. Since you were doing the video tap stuff, let's go with production just for fun.
I think it was Bringing Back Christmas, which was a big, big number that was actually shot at a stage or hall, Mechanics Hall, I believe, outside of Boston.
In Worcester, yeah.
Yeah. And Charles Dickens actually read A Christmas Carol there.
Wow.
That's because Boston has all these super old things. It's like,
Yeah, I'm one of them. Okay, so let's go the other way. What was the last thing you were working on before the edit was done?
Oh, man, you're really pushing my memory. I don't recall.
That's okay.
I think I'm almost lying about Bringing Back Christmas, too.
Okay, well, nobody's going to know but you, so we'll go with that. You talked a little bit about some of the advice that Tom Cross gave you about your bins, just the actual room itself. We heard about the couches.
Yeah.
But how do you like to have your editing room set up in terms of what makes you comfortable, the monitors, the speakers, all that stuff?
Yeah. I was listening to Dean Zimmerman talk about his stereo, and I loved what he was saying about stereo. It's just pure and simple. It works. And this one, we were doing temp mixes with Andrew DeCristofaro and his sound team. And he was like, you got to do 5.1 because it'll make our temp mixes go that much faster. And I was like, okay. So, you call the post soup and you're like, I need 5.1 on the cutting room. He's like, So they install the 5.1. But then, of course, everything you export out is stereo. So mixing in 5.1 is crazy. And then we would go remote and then you couldn't monitor in 5.1. But it was helping our process. So I was happy to do it. I work with these guys enough to know that nobody's judging my sound mix coming out of the app. And if it's not bumping people, if it's good enough, nobody's gonna send any red flags up. So it was cool enough with everybody to do this, and it would help out the sound process. So it was the first movie I cut in 5.1, reluctantly. But I don't know if I would do it again. And I think I'm a subscriber of Dean's process. But it's pretty simple with Anders and Morris because we do the same thing every show. Is I always work at a stand-up desk. I never put it down. I never sit, basically. I don't know why. And I'm in the back. My back would be against the back wall. I like a big room. The biggest room I can get, the better. I like the biggest sharpest, most expensive TV I can get. And then big studio speakers are nice, and a nice subwoofer, with the 5.1, and Anders and Morris to my left and my right, and the TV in the middle with the speakers kind of down by the TV.
You mentioned that they said that 5.1 would help the temp mix process go faster.
Yeah.
How does that, what was the reasoning there?
I'd have to press Andrew on that, but, because we would carry the stems through. So, which really, if you had to go into a dialogue change, it was very clunky to edit with that kind of arrangement in the Avid. But again, like we finished in like October sometime, and they were like, hey, Christmas is coming up. I'm like, yeah, in like 5 weeks. They're like, we should preview. And it was like all blue screen, and it was like, oh, should we preview?
So were they thinking that previewing it during the Christmas season would get a more favorable response because it's the season?
Yeah, exactly. So we hustled our butts off, spent God knows how much money on just doing temp visual effects for all this, and put together a finished movie to screen, as best we could, to screen on like the 16th of December. It was like 6 weeks after I was like, nah, it's actually 5. Because there was like a Thanksgiving in there I was counting or something. I wanted to remind him.
Yeah, well, it's good to remind them that, you need days off.
Yeah.
I know I'm going to ask you again about the screening for, when the film was finally ready to be released, those screenings, but screening it that soon, you've still got blue screen. The paint's still wet on this.
Yeah.
What kind of responses did you get to the initial way too early screening preview?
Loved the movie. Loved how original it was, how different it was. The characters are fantastic, but we were a bit too long. Because I think that cut, we were like 2:20 something. We were playing all the musical numbers pretty much all the way through. And I still have, like, the cutting room still loves that version. There's still some purists in our group who love that version of the movie. I might be one of them.
Well, there's nothing wrong with being a purist and loving your original cut.
Yeah.
That's what happens.
The director loved it. He was like, this is the first assembly you put together that I wasn't sick to my stomach. And I was like, hey.
I shouldn't have moved on too quickly from the video tap stuff when I asked you, like, what's the first thing you cut? Because editing the video tap stuff, I think that's kind of interesting. Like, so what is the process there?
You know what really blew about it is like the fact that we're in the 21st century and everywhere you go, the internet just blows on location. Like if there's anybody out there that's listening.
God, I hope so.
Yeah. to the 100 or so people. No,
thank you.
I'm just kidding you, man. If you could create a company that would follow around production with high speed, high end internet, it would make everybody's life so much easier because it's so clunky on set. Like when you're in the office building, or you're at the mechanics hall, or you're on even the sets. Like it's just mind blowing how bad the internet is. And that was the hardest part with this video tap because we were, relying on the internet to send these pieces. But it was some Ukrainian software that these guys developed. I wish I knew.
Q-Take.
Yeah, Q-Take. Yeah. And Cobbs, he had used it before, but never to send to the editor. He uses just for playback.
It's very cool.
It is really cool. And what's super cool is like you could send these Ukrainians some questions and they'll hit you back with answers right away and develop some things for you. So it was nice at that level to have that kind of response for the software. But it was the first time I was ever editing so fast because usually we would edit on the set, but it was the day's dailies. But this time. So it was cool. So you would do like a practice edit. And they were like, do you want to keep these edits? Do you want to preserve them and send them? I was like, I don't care. It's like, for me, it was all about the reference on the set. And I already knew what takes I liked. I already knew because I was watching all the footage as it would come in. And so I go back to the Avid and I wouldn't even reference these edits I did on the set because it was still kind of fresh in my mind what I did. And I would do it better anyways the second time.
Yeah, Paul Matchless, who does Edgar Wright's films. He's a big Q-Take fan and does all his on-set editing and stuff like that.
Yeah. We can never get it to talk time code. So we can never like send a cut back and have it relink with the day's dailies.
You should call Paul. He's got that wired.
Oh, you got that wired?
Yeah, he's got that figured out.
Oh, nice.
So while they're in production, again, you're working on location, and to hear you describe it, it's all a one big, very parallel process. Like you're running around, you're talking to everybody, all the different department heads having fun. But in terms of collaborating with the producer and director, is the first time you really collaborate with them when they come in to do their cut, or even during production, are they coming in and sitting with you and going through stuff?
As soon as I get a scene cut, it goes out the door to Anders and Morris. Those are the two guys it goes to. Every night you're sending them a scene as best you can. You know, you don't really want to, you want to put it together the best way you can, but you're just trying to get them the footage so they can see these pieces and see what they're capturing. And it's a lot of fun for me to send those bits because, you know, it's like your babies, your proud babies going out, you know, so you try and put one or two effects on them and a little music on them if they need it. You know, you're trying to find the temp music that you're going to put in throughout the movie. And usually with Anders, he would give me feedback like the next day, you know, and he's cool enough to like give me this feedback and know that I have new dailies coming in. So he's not looking for these things to come right back to him with the changes. So I would keep these notes, and as I got time, I would go back and do his notes on these scenes that I'd send him. But he's cool enough to let me keep sending him new stuff. And then it was fun because production shut down. Will had something he had to do in Europe. So he shut down for a week, but editorial stayed up. And that was like the coolest thing ever in the middle of production for an editor, because I had 7 days to just polish everything I had up until that point. And that was really a big help.
Well, you mentioned Tom's advice about how to do the bins. How do you just sort of get your arms around all this media and the story at large?
One clip at a time, I think, you know. You know, you put it in the bin, and like I said, I love the little baby bins of a scene. You know, if a scene was like a massive scene, dividing it up was really cool because it would be manageable in my head, and you would get wins on the day. And you just weren't, I hate feeling so overwhelmed with footage. Like I always tell my assistant, don't tell me they shot a ton of stuff. And just, you know, because at the end of the day, you always want more as an editor because you're like, there is a ton of stuff, but I'm still looking for some shot that I don't have, maybe that I wish I had a better shot of somewhere.
Well, you said you tell your assistant, please tell me they didn't shoot more stuff, but does Sean, either for Spirited or as a rule, give you a lot of coverage, a lot of alternate takes to work with?
You know, this one, he had a idea to keep these shots as oneers, but he also shot coverage in case that didn't work out. And in some cases, we used a lot of the oneers, but we ended up having to cut in just to cut up the songs because they were so long. And that came in handy to have that coverage. And to script sync the songs was very handy. The click track on songs was super handy just because it helped keep like a roadmap of the song itself. There was always this thing that music was talking about as the grid. And it was kind of this thing I never could quite understand, and nobody could ever quite explain it.
It sounds like the Pro Tools grid where it's basically the measures of the song, maybe.
Yeah.
I could be wrong.
No, that could be true. But I loved keeping the click track with me and the music. And what I was finding as I was going through the musical process is if you've got some, like a solo drum track was very helpful as well. Just for feeling the beats of what the actors were hitting. Like sometimes that would get lost in all the music. And if you could solo some of this stuff and have these moments dry without the other instruments playing, you would really start to understand the choreography of the dance in a better way. And I thought that was kind of one thing that I learned as I went through the process. Because like you could feel the dancers hitting the beats, But when you solo these tracks, then you got even a greater understanding of what they were doing.
It's one thing I'm going to solo the drum so I can get a better sense of the rhythm and what the dancers are doing. But were there times where you're like, you know what? I don't need to hear the pan flute or whatever.
I tried. I think that's above my pay grade. And music is like, if they get a whiff of you doing anything with their music, you're getting like 10 phone calls. So I tried to keep my nose clean as being my first musical.
Good idea.
I'll let Myron handle that.
Have the additional editor take the hard phone calls.
And he did. He was instrumental in handling the music machine for me.
I bet.
Yeah.
Well, we're definitely going to talk about Myron a little more. You hit on so many things I want to revisit, and I'm going to lose track too. The script sync part of it.
Yeah.
How did you actually implement that? So clearly, it sounds like you had the lyrics of the songs in script sync. How did that?
Yeah, that was instrumental.
Was it just for reference, or did you edit from it? How did that work?
Script sync. The guy's always working. Bless his heart. J. Michael Cheeves was at the script sync, and he was always working very hard to get these things done. But you never have it as you're doing the assembly. So you put it together. But then, if you want to go back with the director, it's very important with the script sync because you can go to each line and show him what he has for those moments in the song. I find that, you're watching daily, so you have to watch all this footage. So I don't use script sync then, but when it comes in really handy is like if there's a joke or a line, I like to have them busted out and marked individually. If it's a long verse of song, you definitely want at least 1 or 2 or 3 marks to break up that verse, because you don't have the time to sit there and watch the whole guy sing the whole verse. You want to go right to the line you're looking for, and you're like, can you break these out for me? And the same with a joke too. You want those right on the joke.
But you mentioned that wonderful break you got to take because Will Ferrell had to go off to Europe to do something. We hadn't even talked about the leads, Will Ferrell and Ryan Reynolds. Considering the comedic skills of both of those guys, was there a lot of improv, and were there a lot of things off script that you got to play with, or did Anders kind of like to keep it, well, it's a musical and it's very structured and synchronized and we got to really stick to the lines?
Yeah, those guys would improv quite a bit. There's a couple of bits in the movie. The most famous one is at the end of Good Afternoon, where Ryan's like, the medium's new for me, tap, and he's like, oh, you're quite good at it, and I was like, this is a beautiful improv and it's on point. And, usually improvs go down a rabbit hole and it makes it hard to use them. But this was sharp. It was crisp. It had a good end. Marley interrupts them perfectly. That was my favorite improv from the movie. And I was glad. And there's a little dancer girl that's right in between them who's like one of the ghosts. And she's looking dead into the camera. And it's just all about it had this like really cool thing happening in the shot. And I was glad to see that made the movie. But yeah, those guys were fantastic. And the relationship and the energy between them was, worth $1 million. And, you're just like, wow, I can't believe they're paying me to work on this movie.
Well, don't tell them that. So going back to something you said about Anders shooting oneers and working with those a lot for a musical, and maybe this was something that Anders came to, something maybe Myron said, hey, I know a thing or two about musicals, maybe you do this, that you stay wide as much as possible to capture all that choreography.
Yeah, because, these dancers are so good. And the choreography and Kramer's lighting. And we had a guy, Don Hoffman or something like that. He was a theatrical guy from New York. So we had lights in the shot like nobody cared because it had this Broadway feel to it. And like from day one, there were lights in the frame and things like that. And these wide shots of the dancers. And you're just like, it all just works. Like I didn't even think about the lights being in the shot. And it's funny because you cut these bits and then you send it to sound. And the first thing the sound guy is like, he goes to me, he goes, hey, what's with the lights in the shot? I was like, oh. Yeah, I was like, does it take you out? Like, tell me, what's your thoughts? He's like, I don't know. It just, maybe it bumped him funny or something. But initially, I'm just so caught up in all the performances that I just thought it all worked. And it was cool to see all these dancers, happening at once and then being able to punch in from time to time to catch these little cheeky moments or fun little moments,
You would assume that all those different takes is really more in the physical aspects of how the actor moves, as well as whether or not the choreography worked, as opposed to, there's no delivery of lines. That's already taken care of. So does it make it easier to find the right take in a situation like that? Because it really is a little more, it's more about mechanics than it is about emotion and performance.
Absolutely. You have probably 10 people on the set that they're just focused in like a hawk on a rabbit, watching lips, watching feet. You got the choreographer watching this. You got the music supervisors watching the sync on the lips. So the only time I would ever go to a script note is like when I wasn't sure which take was the best for the performance that everybody wanted on set. So you would have to double check with them, but there was always something not 100% perfect. And I think that's awesome. I think that's how it probably should be, or else it gets too perfect, like a Pixar movie maybe, or something like that.
You want to shoot for about 93% on any movie.
That's right. Exactly. I mean, you want it to feel in sync and you want it to feel right, but there was a lot of people that were making sure that you were using the right take. Let me just put it that way.
Got it. Well, for musicals, you have the on-set playback. Usually it's coming out of Pro Tools. Generally in a film, the work flows from editorial, from the media composer out to the sound editing and mixing team and Pro Tools. But here you're starting with music. Tell me a little more about the sound workflow in a musical, what the order might actually be, or how things might be different than a typical dramatic or comedic film.
Well, one thing that jumps out to me is like sometimes, you get all the songs at the beginning of the production and, you have the vocal track, the background track, the instrumental and the click, and then you shoot it and it's a lot of times not the same track anymore. So there was some instances where I'd have to go to the playback guy and say, hey, can you bounce that out to this jump drive? Because I don't have that track, the track you don't just made.
That seems like a really hard thing to keep track of.
That's why it was helpful to A, be on the set, B, know him, and be right next to him and have that information, because nobody's going to tell, hey, make sure editorial knows we just edited the song, as they're trying to make their day. And so it was good to be boots on the ground there and be able to get that stuff from them. And then that, it has a ripple effect because you no longer have the click track, the instrumental. Like he just has like the stereo mix of it for the moment. And then maybe later it'll come to you. But, he's busy throughout the day too. So he can't be making you special tracks or things like that.
I think you mentioned earlier that your first assembly is like 220, which you love, and eventually got down to 207, I think. And when you have a musical, it almost feels like the soundtrack is the tail that wags the dog. Like, these are the songs. This is what it is. And the songs tell a story. Do you have to adhere to that structure, or is it possible? I mean, I think you mentioned trimming down a song or two. Is it tough when your narrative in some ways is built around that soundtrack for you to be able to go in and make those changes?
If you would ask me that question at the beginning of the show, I would have been like, absolutely. But now as I went through the process, I'm like, nope. We killed songs. We trimmed a lot of them got trimmed down just because for time, and for some story elements, they were trimmed just to tighten up the movie. These things got trimmed down. There's a great song with Will Ferrell singing on his bed in Ryan's bedroom, his childhood bedroom, which is like a 10, literally they built the set. It's like 10 by 12 room, and it's got a bed in there. And they're doing this big Broadway musical number, and they're making references to how it's not an ideal place to do the song, but you got to do what you got to do. And like Will singing with Ryan's like soccer trophy and he gets on the bed and he's doing this big power chord at the end. And in the back, Ryan just sneaks away from him. He just leaves him because he's so like uninspired by Will. And Will stops and he's like, "Hey, where'd he go?" You can't just run away when somebody's haunting you. And that was like one of my favorite musical numbers. And I would never have thought that would have gotten cut from the movie, but it was just rehashing information the audience already knew. And that one went. Bringing Back Christmas, we had a car drive onto the set with a Christmas tree on top. There was a nativity scene. There were so many more elements to that song that never made it into the final cut.
And that's the Ryan Reynolds number at the beginning where he's addressing the Christmas Growers Conference.
That's right.
Which is my absolute favorite moment in the whole film. And just
are you a real tree or a plastic tree guy?
Oh my, you really doing that to me?
Come on, man. It's what we do.
God, and I grew up in Maine too. At this point in my life, I'm a plastic tree guy.
Yeah. All right. Fair enough.
Sorry.
No. I don't judge.
No, good thing for me. So let's talk a little bit about sound effects, spotting sound effects, and what sort of limitations, if I have to use that word, that working with music puts on you. In other words, I get a big musical number, and you already talked about, I need to adhere to the beats, and I want to really know where those beats are to get the best out of the dance numbers. Working with sound effects, you're playing against all this music.
Yeah.
Does that make it harder to spot sound effects?
Yeah, I try to, and then the sound guys do a really good job at it. But again, that's where the click track comes in really handy, because it'll tell you where you can put these and where you can't to make it work with the song as far as the rhythm of the sound effects are. And it's always a big battle between music and I feel like the rest of the production, whether how much sound effects you can add to the song or not, because the music guys are, bless their hearts, they're purists. They for the most part, I don't want to put words in their mouth, but
they say they're purists. I don't know.
And I always said Spirited felt to me like a movie with a musical in it. And anytime we would get kind of that note back, I always felt good about that, because I thought we were like a gateway musical, kind of. which is pretty cool in my mind, and I think in Sean's mind and some of the other people's mind, that's kind of what we were leaning towards. But the sound effects, yeah, they were great to add to the songs from the very beginning. Like, it felt really good to hear the world as we were playing our musical numbers, because it grounds them, and it makes it feel real. Like we worked really hard to not have that canned, soundtrack voice and things like that. And the guys did a really good job. Sonny Workington, gotta love him, had throat cancer through the production, never missed a day of work, beat the cancer all through Spirited, and would cut like every line that somebody said so that the music guys could weave these lines into the song. So it would like give it kind of a smooth intro into the song, like kind of fade out of production and go into pretty singing voice,
Wow. Beat the cancer during the film.
Yeah. And you would think we would all be like a little sensitive, but no, there were jokes and all kinds.
No, I could tell you guys probably weren't that sensitive. We talked about the sound effects. Let's talk about visual effects, or at least sort of some kinetic kind of editing.
Ugh.
Again, with so much high energy cutting that you have to do in something like this. For every edit that's obvious to the viewer, there's got to be so many more that are hidden in there that you have to put in to make things work, whether it's fluid morphs or splits or animats or all that stuff. Just tell me about that component of it, how you may have had to do stuff like that, or how you might have been hindered from being able to do it just because there's so much going on.
Yeah. The visual effects were insane. Devereaux and his team, Sean Devereaux, the thing that really jumps out to me, and I'm sorry, Matt, if I get away from your question, but
you're always in a better place if you get away from my question.
the thing that jumps out to me about the visual effects was filling in all the holes for 5 weeks after wrap and for our preview in Pasadena. That was the craziest thing I've ever seen, that the guys rallied to do that. And it was a big cost to the production too. So we had to pay for that later, because, we had to be kind of judicial with our visual effects budget after that, because we spent so much money up front. It was tricky, and I would send in notes all the time. Like, I love visual effects, and it's a very important process. And, I'm kind of the first line of defense because they would send them to the cutting room. The guys would cut them in, and then I would give notes. And every time I'd give notes, that I would get the note back from Danny Walker, the visual effects editor. Bless his heart, great guy. I will pass this along. The vendor's about out of time with all these shots, and they would tell me that time and time again. And I would just keep sending them notes. And, I get it. You can either do the note or you can't, but I'm going to keep looking at the stuff and keep giving you feedback and keep giving you notes. And eventually we'll all put our pencils down and call it a day.
You're talking about how there's sort of a meta aspect to this, like the film is aware that it's a musical and that we're having fun with Charles Dickens and all that stuff. There's a gag in the film where Will Ferrell's character, the Ghost of Christmas Present, he mentions that they have people that are in charge of making the transitions happen between the flashbacks and the flash forwards that are familiar to A Christmas Carol. With both the fantasy nature of the story as well as the musical aspect, there are, of course, a lot of high energy transitions between these shots and scenes. Again, just being a musical, I have to imagine a lot of that is really rigid and predetermined, but are you able to play with that a little bit?
All those are kind of found in post. I think Sean has the idea that he wants a transition and like those guys flying, my first cut was like 2 minutes long of them flying through the city, because there's just so much great footage and I just find a song and I put it together. And then he's like, no, that should be like 10 seconds. I was like, all right, cool. And it's so great because Ryan sells it so well in that transition. And the audience sees it coming and they just enjoy the moment where he's like, we were just here. It's just a really fun moment. But probably the last transition we found in the cutting room was the one coming out of the classroom into the memorial of the kid and the smoke kind of coming in, the fog kind of coming in around Yet to Come, and Ryan going, what does it say? And Mark Patterson did a great kind of, what would you call it? A great kind of echo effect. And it really let his voice ring out. And it just kind of, that along with the visual effect design of it all, really made that transition something where we didn't have it originally.
The great Mark Patterson.
Yeah.
Re-recording Mixer to the Stars along with his partner in crime, Will Files.
Yeah, great team. I would just sit at the back of their stage. The stage, like, it goes up, up, and up, and there's like this high level. And it was just so much fun to sit up there and just watch the movie on the big screen. And like I had my Avid right there and just watch those guys do their work, stay out of their way.
Especially Will. You mentioned Myron, and just for people listening, not sure who we're talking about, Myron Kerstein was an additional editor on this film. Myron, quite the sharpshooter when it comes to musicals, In the Heights and Tick, Tick, Boom. Working with him, I know this is your first big musical.
Yeah.
Were you able to learn anything about his process and how he approaches musicals that you could adopt?
I learned that what I learned from Myron, he has a very good understanding of music. And that is critical when working in a musical. And, I took a class just in music before I took this job just so I could try to get an understanding of music. And I didn't, I'm reading stuff. I'm looking for everything I can to try and just saturate my brain with music knowledge. And it's such a language that you have to learn. And Myron's understanding of it, I can see how it so helps what he's doing because he does a fantastic job at it.
You had another very talented editor on hand as a consultant.
Yeah.
Tell me who she is and what she brought to the table.
Debbie Neal Fisher, fantastic lady to work with. She came in and, she just shoots from the hip, tells you how she feels, and it's great. We spent a couple of days in the cutting room, her, Sean, and John and I just going through the movie, and it's just fun because now Anders and Morris get to hear it from somebody else, not just me. And they get to hear different things that we weren't even thinking of. So it's great to have her in the cutting. It's like working with your mom, who's really talented in a career of what she does. You know what I mean?
I'm not sure how Debbie would feel about that, but I think I guess it depends on who your mom is.
I think she should take it as a compliment because she's the best.
Absolutely.
My mom's the best. What are you kidding me? So,
of
yeah.
course. You know, I already told you my favorite scene from the film. Do you have a favorite scene, or at least a favorite aspect of the film?
Yeah, the one that we cut out.
It's always the way.
No, Good Afternoon was the best. I think it was a really just a barn burning sequence. It was a lot of fun to cut. The guys tap dancing, the burning guy coming out of the building screaming "Good Afternoon," which was Sonny's voice, by the way, the dialogue editor.
Such a fun movie. I had all these questions to ask you, and you nailed every one of them.
I did?
Absolutely. The only thing I didn't ask was 25 years ago when you were an apprentice editor on the movie Jack Frost.
Oh.
Did you have any idea you were about to pigeonhole yourself as the Christmas movie editor?
No, I had no idea. You know, I got to start in this business with the silver spoon in my mouth, Matt. Working for Ivan Reitman. I walked into his company at Northern Lights Entertainment. Universal had just built him a brand new building. Barton Myers was the architect. Polished cement floors, thick glass, exposed wood, and metal beams. All the resources any man could ever have. God rest his soul. And it was the coolest job. And I just knew right then that this is what I wanted to do, work in movies. I started out as a PA with him, worked for him for 5 years. He actually helped me get in the union.
Wow. That's a great way to start a career.
Yeah, it was awesome.
Well, the only thing I have left to ask you, because I think it's appropriate for this time of year, is, Brad, what is the best gift you can give an editor for the holidays?
Best gift I could give an editor for the holidays. Oh, man. Work hard.
That's a gift?
It is a gift, in my mind. I have a crazy work ethic, Matt. And I don't know, I feel like hard work isn't a thing anymore.
I see your point. That said, why don't you just get me a scarf? Brad doesn't need to get me anything. He already gave me and all of us a really fun musical comedy to enjoy this holiday season. So let's all give him back the gift of gratitude for taking the time to talk with us today about editing Spirited. He certainly earned it. Hey pals, there's still, I don't know, X number of days left to give a gift this year. Unless you're one of those lazy slackers that gets behind on the podcast and catches up months later. Yes, I'm looking at you, Alan Baumgarten. But if you're not Alan, there is still time to get a great deal on Media Composer and Pro Tools. So check out the link in the show notes and see what Avid has in store for you. So did you have fun today, boys and girls? I sure did. I'm not sure how many of these podcasts I have left in me, before the end of the year, that is. How many I've left overall is also in question. But what I'm saying is I might need to take a week or two off in the coming weeks. So do not panic if you see a little break in the action. I will be back at some point soon. And when I am, I hope you'll be there too. Until then, this is Matt Fury thanking you for joining me right here on The Rough Cut.